The cemetery was silent, except for the restless flapping of white tents in the Lagos breeze. Mourners in black gathered close, their eyes wet, their hearts heavy. At the center of it all, gleaming like gold under the sun, rested a polished casket. Inside lay Chief Adewale Bakari, billionaire, philanthropist, and a man beloved by thousands. To the crowd, he was gone. His empire had lost its builder. His family had lost its pillar. His wife, Folake, stood dressed in a flawless black gown, her face painted with grief. But behind her veil of tears, her eyes burned with something colder than sorrow. The pastor's voice trembled as he raised his Bible. From dust we came, to dust we shall return. At the edges of the crowd, whispers rippled. So sudden. He was strong just last week. May God keep him. 2 grave workers stepped forward to lower the casket into the earth. That was when it happened. A ragged figure pushed through the mourners. His beard was wild, his coat torn, his feet bare against the grass. His voice ripped the air apart like thunder. "Stop! Don't bury him! Chief Adewale is alive!" Gasps erupted. Phones rose instantly, cameras rolling. Folake's head snapped around, her mask of grief slipping for half a second. "Who is this madman?" she hissed. The guards moved in, ready to drag the intruder out. But he did not stop. He pointed straight at the casket. His eyes, though weary, burned with unshakable fire. "My name is Emeka Durojaye," he cried. "I may be homeless, but I know what I heard. Chief Adewale was poisoned with something that mimics death. He looks gone, but he is not. Give me 1 minute. Check him. Please, for God's sake, check him." The crowd fell into uneasy silence. Some shook their heads. Others leaned forward, curiosity battling disbelief. Folake stepped closer, her voice sharp as glass. "Remove this lunatic. He insults my husband's memory." But before the guards could seize him, a frail but commanding voice rose. Mama Ireti, Adewale's elderly aunt, lifted her hand. Her wrapper was simple, her eyes ancient and sharp. "If there is even a chance," she said slowly, "we must not bury him until we are sure." The crowd stirred, murmurs grew. The pastor hesitated. Folake's lips tightened. "This is nonsense." But sweat glistened on her brow. Emeka knelt beside the coffin, trembling but steady. He pulled a small vial from his bag, old, worn, but carefully kept. His fingers shook as he unscrewed the cap. He looked to Mama Ireti. "Help me lift his head. Just a little. Let air reach him." 2 young men stepped forward, ignoring Folake's hiss of protest. They raised the chief slightly, enough for Emeka to slide his folded coat beneath his neck. "Remove the cotton from his nostrils," Emeka whispered. Mama Ireti did it gently. Gasps broke out. The chief's skin, though pale, carried the faintest warmth. Folake barked, "Enough of this circus." But Emeka held firm. He lifted the dropper above the chief's lips. "1 drop," he murmured. "Come back, chief. Come back to us." He squeezed. A single drop fell. The crowd held its breath. 10 seconds. 15. Nothing. Folake smirked. "You see?" Then Emeka whispered 1 more. The second drop slid into Adewale's mouth. Silence deepened. Then, a faint sound. A cough, so small it might have been the wind. But then his chest rose barely, trembling like a weak flame. "He breathes!" Mama Ireti cried, tears streaking down her cheeks. Chaos exploded. Screams, shouts, prayers filled the air. Some mourners fell to their knees. Others filmed wildly, capturing history with shaking hands. Adewale's lips parted. A single whisper crawled out. Folek. Every eye turned to his widow. And at that exact moment, something slipped from her clutch bag. A syringe, glinting in the sun, rolling across the grass. The crowd gasped. Folake's face drained of color. And Emeka's voice thundered, "You tried to bury him alive!" The air split open with shouts. "Look at the syringe!" Someone screamed. "Arrest her!" Another voice thundered. Folek staggered back, her hands trembling. No, that's not mine." But the words fell flat. Her mask of grief had shattered, and fear poured from her eyes. 2 guards lunged, but not toward Emeka. This time, they grabbed Folake by the arms. Mama Ireti's voice cut sharp as a blade. "This man saved Adewale's life, and you..." She turned on Folake, her finger shaking. "You planned to bury him alive," gasps rippled. Some mourners sobbed, others cursed under their breath. But Folek straightened suddenly, her face twisting from fear into fury. "You fools," she spat. "Do you think he loved you? Do you think he cared for anyone but himself? I was his shadow, his burden, all his billions. And what did I have? Nothing. I was tired of living in his shadow." The crowd recoiled. Adewale coughed again, his eyelids fluttering weakly. His voice, though faint, cut through the chaos. "Folek, why?" Her lips trembled. For a moment sorrow flickered, then rage swallowed it. "Because you never saw me. Because I wanted it all." The guards tightened their grip. Phones zoomed in, recording every word. Her confession spread instantly across the digital world. But before she could say more, sirens wailed in the distance. Police vehicles stormed the gates of the cemetery, their red lights flashing against tombstones. Folek thrashed, screaming, "No! He was supposed to die. He was supposed to..." Her words dissolved into madness as she was dragged away, kicking, spitting, her veil torn from her head. Emeka knelt again, his hands steady now. He pressed his ear to Adewale's chest. A faint heartbeat, weak but real. Tears welled in his tired eyes. "He's alive," he whispered. "By God, he's alive." Mama Ireti collapsed to her knees, clutching her wrapper. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." The pastor dropped his Bible, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is no burial. This is resurrection." The police swarmed Folake, securing the syringe in a clear evidence bag. But Emeka's eyes stayed fixed on Adewale. The man was fragile, his empire shaken, but life still clung to him. As the chief was rushed into an ambulance, Emeka sat back on the grass, drained. He had no coat now, no shoes, nothing but the truth. But in that moment, the world finally saw him, not as a beggar, not as a madman, but as the voice that had stopped death itself. The courtroom overflowed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. The world was watching. At the front, Chief Adewale sat pale but alive, supported by Mama Ireti on one side and his loyal assistant Ngozi on the other. In the dock, Folake sat with her head bowed, her once flawless appearance stripped down to shame and iron cuffs. Beside her, Dr. Ajayi, the family physician, trembled, sweat rolling down his face. The judge's gavel struck. This court is now in session. The state versus Folake Bakari and Dr. Ajayi. Charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, and betrayal. The prosecutor's voice rang out, sharp as steel. What we have before us is not a case of grief. It is greed. A wife and a doctor conspired to bury Chief Adewale alive so his empire would fall into their hands. The crowd gasped. Folake lifted her head suddenly, her voice sharp. Lies! All lies. But the prosecutor smiled coldly. He held up the syringe sealed in evidence. This, found at the graveside, contains a paralytic compound called tetrodotoxin. In small doses, it mimics death. Heartbeat slows, breathing nearly stops. Only specialized care can revive the victim. Dr. Ajayi, you declared Chief Adewale dead. Yet this syringe proves otherwise. All eyes turned to the trembling doctor. His lips quivered. I was forced. Folake threatened me. If I didn't help, she said she'd ruin me. She said I owed her loyalty. The judge's eyes narrowed. And so you betrayed your oath? Dr. Ajayi broke down, sobbing. Forgive me. Forgive me. I was weak. Folake turned on him with venom. Coward! You enjoyed the cars, the houses I gave you. Don't pretend you didn't want him gone too. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras zoomed in on her furious face. Adewale's voice, hoarse but strong, cut through the noise. Folake, I gave you everything. My home, my name, my love. And this is how you repay me. She snapped back, eyes wild. Love? You call that love? You never saw me. You never respected me. I wanted my own crown, not to be the shadow of your empire. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the witness stand, Emeka rose. His ragged clothes had been washed, his beard combed, but his eyes were the same, burning with truth. I heard them, he said firmly. Under the bridge where I sleep, Folake and the doctor. They planned it. They laughed about the quick burial. They said no one would suspect. I knew if I didn't speak, they would bury him alive. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The defense lawyer sneered. And we are to believe the word of a beggar? A man who sleeps under bridges? Emeka's voice rose like thunder. Yes, I sleep under bridges. Yes, I have nothing. But what I have is the truth. And the truth saved his life. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others shouting, God bless you. The judge's gavel cracked. Order returned. Her gaze swept over Folake and Dr. Ajayi. The evidence is clear. The betrayal undeniable. The court will not bury justice as you tried to bury life. She turned, her voice sharp. Folake Bakari, Dr. Ajayi, you are guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment. The hall exploded in noise. Reporters raced out. Mourners wept. Folake shrieked as guards dragged her away. No, it should have been mine. All mine. Her screams echoed, fading behind steel doors. And just like that, the woman who wanted it all was left with nothing. The prison door slammed shut behind Folake. Her screams lingered like smoke, but outside the courthouse the air felt different, lighter. Chief Adewale leaned against his cane as Mama Ireti guided him toward the waiting car. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Adewale's gaze fell on one man, the stranger who had saved his life. Emeka stood at the edge of the crowd, shoulders hunched, his ragged shirt torn at the seams. For once, no one pushed him away. No one called him mad. Instead, people whispered his name like a prayer. That's the man who stopped the burial, the beggar who saved a billionaire. A miracle in disguise. Adewale's driver opened the car door, but the chief paused. He turned, his voice carrying across the murmurs. You, Emeka, come. Gasps rippled. The cameras swung. Emeka froze, his lips trembling. He shook his head. "No, sir. I don't belong there." But Adewale's eyes softened, his voice firm. "You belong where truth lives, and truth saved me. Come." Slowly, uncertainly, Emeka stepped forward. For the first time in years, people parted for him, not with disgust, but with respect. He climbed into the car beside the chief, and the door closed. The mansion that once smelled of lilies and sorrow now breathed with new life. Sunlight poured through the halls. Workers bustled again. Yet for Adewale, everything felt fragile. His empire bruised, his heart heavier than before. One evening, he sat with Emeka in the study. The table was lined with files and contracts, but Adewale ignored them. His eyes studied the man across from him. "Tell me," he said quietly, "who are you, really?" Emeka looked down at his calloused hands. Silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't always like this," he whispered. "Once, I was a man with a family, a wife, a daughter. I worked in tech, software engineer. I built things that mattered. But one night, everything collapsed. I came home to a letter. My wife was gone. She took my daughter with her. And in that letter," his voice cracked, "she wrote that the girl I raised, the one I called mine, wasn't my blood." Adewale's chest tightened. "I lost everything that night," Emeka continued, tears brimming. "My job, my home, my will to live. I wandered the streets, drinking my days away, sleeping under bridges. I told myself I was already dead. Until that night, when I overheard Folake and Dr. Ajayi plotting. For the first time in years, I felt fire in my bones. I couldn't let another man be buried alive. Not when I could stop it. Not again." The room was still. Adewale swallowed hard, his old hands trembling. "You saved me," he said. "But more than that, you reminded me that life is stubborn. It refuses to die when truth still breathes." He leaned forward, placing a hand on Emeka's shoulder. "You will not return to the bridge. From today, this is your home. You gave me back my life. Let me give you back yours." Emeka's throat tightened. Tears spilled. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Word spread across Lagos. The story of the beggar who saved a billionaire became legend. News anchors repeated his name. Social media trended with hashtags. But in the mansion, Emeka moved quietly. At first, he helped with small duties, carrying files, checking schedules. But little by little, his hidden brilliance surfaced. One afternoon, during a tense board meeting, the directors panicked when a critical presentation file corrupted. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Billions hung in the balance. While others fumbled, Emeka leaned over the laptop. His fingers danced. Within minutes, the file restored, the slides glowing on the projector. Gasps filled the room. "Where did you learn that?" one director asked, stunned. Emeka hesitated. "I was once a software engineer." The room buzzed. Adewale stood proudly. "From today, Emeka is no longer a helper in the background. He is my advisor. His voice will guide this company." Whispers filled the boardroom, some skeptical, others nodding with respect. And so, the man once ignored under bridges now sat at the table where empires were built. Evenings in the mansion grew warmer. Adewale, fragile but healing, often sat on the veranda watching the sunset with Mama Ireti by his side. She smiled, grateful the shadows had lifted. Emeka, meanwhile, found something unexpected. Laughter. The housemaid's daughter, a kind young woman named Amaka, began speaking with him. She was gentle, her smile disarming, her words soft. She saw not the scars of his past, but the man beneath them. At first, Emeka resisted. "I have nothing to give," he told her. But Amaka only smiled. "You gave back a man's life. That is more than riches." For the first time in years, Emeka's heart stirred. Slowly, carefully, he allowed himself to feel again. The garden of the mansion glowed with lanterns. Laughter floated through the night. Children ran barefoot across the grass. Emeka stood tall, in a tailored suit, his beard trimmed, his eyes bright. Beside him, Amaka held his hand, her belly round with new life. Chief Adewale raised a glass, his voice firm though his body was weak. "Tonight, we celebrate not just survival but resurrection. Betrayal tried to bury us, but love dug us out." The crowd clapped, tears in many eyes. Emeka's gaze swept the faces. Once strangers, now family. He squeezed Amaka's hand. For the first time in years, he was no longer invisible. He was reborn, and as the night sky cracked open with fireworks, the story closed with one truth burning in every heart. Hope does not die. Love is louder than betrayal, and sometimes the man the world ignores is the one sent to save it. Thank you for watching African Tales by Nina. If you were moved by this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Another journey awaits in our next tale. Until then, may your days be full of blessings, your nights filled with stories that never fade, and always stay blessed.